Hey everyone, hopefully you enjoyed lunch. I actually have a bit of a surprise for you. It's a little known secret that we have a celebrity that works at Atlassian. You know, you might know him from such movies as The Greatest Showman or Wolverine from the X-Men movies. And you can see that photo right there. He actually moonlights as a guy called Guy Herbert as the risk and compliance guru at Atlassian. So you're all very, very, very privileged and special to be here right now. Without further ado, Guy is going to talk to us about compliance in an agile world. So please welcome him on the stage.
Thank you. Okay, so I was sort of expecting this was going to be a packed room with Hugh Jackman appearing in a leading role here. Anyone work in an industry where the rate of change is getting slower, where there are no new competitors and compliance obligations are staying the same? Yep, me neither. Customers are demanding better and faster. They expect services to be up. Competitors are coming at us faster and from more directions. Barriers to entry are dropping. And there are more compliance obligations that we need to meet to keep our businesses running. Agile was developed to help IT projects deal with change. But we're now seeing that organisations are using Agile across the whole organisation to help them thrive in change. But the question you're here to answer is, how do we use the adaptability of Agile and still maintain our compliance obligations? I've been doing risk and compliance for about 25 years, but it's okay, I've also held real jobs. I've managed development teams, configuration teams. I've also actually run real projects, delivering billing systems in telcos. So I know some of the things that you have to deal with, not just sitting in the corner. Okay, there are three underlying messages in this presentation. The first one is that Agile can't succeed without the right culture. So in your organisations, you have to get this culture right to be able to get Agile to work. The second one is that you need to think differently to be able to do compliance in an Agile world. You can't take what is traditionally done and just shove it into Agile. It doesn't work. And your business needs you to help them because compliance and change are not going away. A little bit of background. I joined Atlassian 5 years ago. At the time, we had no compliance obligations, which is a pretty sweet gig when you're a risk and compliance person. But we knew that we would. And my boss at the time, so I was hired by the CIO at the time, and he said to me, "We need to stay fast. If you slow us down, you're going to have to go and find another job." The second is, as an Agile organisation, it's a do-ocracy. You need to do stuff. So if I sat there in the corner pontificating about how we should be doing risk and compliance, I would get sidelined and there would be no value for me in the organisation. And the third one was, good luck with that. I believe that one of the key parts of my job is to make risk and compliance better. I'm never happy with the way that processes work. I want things to be more effective as well as more efficient. Okay. I generally give this talk to risk and compliance people. Have we got any risk and compliance people in the audience? Really risk and compliance people? So he who has done IT audit. Yes, yes, yes. Ah, you poor things. I know what that's like. Okay. What is Agile? It's been around for about 17 years. So this is not new. The important thing to remember is that it's a continuum. It's not one or the other. Yes, we want individuals and interactions, but that doesn't mean we get rid of processes and tools. We're seeing Agile used across organisations now. And so what I like to do is we take the manifesto which says working software And I change that and I say this is working product. And it's not just IT product, it's all of the products that the organisation is building, managing, maintaining, delivering. It's about collaboration, but there is negotiation. And when I talk to the latter parts of this presentation and some of the things that Atlassian does with our pipeline, you need to understand that some of these things you're going to have to negotiate with your auditors. And it's about responding to an enabling change. And I want to enable change in a way that creates value. With those things with Agile, I then think about what's the impact on compliance. And it's the culture that comes with this. And this is what we see with the culture of Agile. Decentralized decisions. Small teams making decisions, changing the way they do things. And it's not just what they're delivering, it's the way they're delivering it. And so compliance needs to be able to deal with that. And then it's what can they change? So compliance needs to be able to say, these are the things that the teams can change. Set the boundaries and then give the teams the freedom within those boundaries to make those changes. It's about communication at that point. There is a definite reward for action, for making change. You need to improve your service, improve your product. But compliance needs to understand people are going to change stuff. And they're going to change it as they're going through the process. It's not this and then change. The teams, they learn and they get feedback. So, has anybody heard of OODA loops? One person? Cool, okay. It actually came out of the US military, 2 people, sorry. And the idea is that you observe your environment, you orientate so you know where you fit in, you decide what you're going to do with that information, and then you act on it. And that's really important because at the end of every sprint you run a retrospective and you learn what worked and what didn't work, and then you change. The fourth one that I really like is that because you're delivering things into the hands of the users, the customers, the people that you're providing the service to, you actually get a really high level of engagement with your team members. And from a risk and compliance perspective, that's really, really useful. Because people care about stuff. They will then think about what's the risk associated with what they're doing. They'll then bring that into the work. They'll tell people about what they're doing. They'll raise risks. They'll put their hand up when they feel that something isn't right. And that's really, really powerful from a risk and compliance perspective. Okay, today I'm going to talk about 3 things. The first one is how your compliance teams can use Jira to abstract the compliance obligations away from the teams doing real work and allow your team to get their work done while meeting their obligations. The second one is how you can use Jira and Confluence so that teams get context to be able to make decisions and compliance teams can know what you're doing without interrupting you all the time. And how you can spend less time with your auditors by using Bitbucket and Bamboo to implement peer review and green build controls and automate deployment. And let's face it, who wants to spend more time with their auditors? Okay, few acronyms. These are some of the compliance obligations that Atlassian needs to meet. So, PCI, it's actually PCI DSS, which is the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. And this is one of the things that you need to have if you're going to take credit card payments. So we have a number of payment gateways, and so we need to meet this. We are a US listed entity, and so we are subject to Sarbanes-Oxley, and so SOX requirements. This is around making sure that we have a control environment around our financial statement information flows. What they're worried about is that you're going to have a material misstatement of your financial statements, and we need to have a control environment so that we know that we're not going to have one of those. Enron was the driver for that. SOC, a Service Organisation Control Report. Does anybody know that we run cloud services? Yes? Yes? Cool. People who buy those cloud services want to know that the controls that we're operating are designed effectively and are operating effectively. And so we get our controls tested by an external organisation, Ernst & Young are the organisation that do that for us, and they come in and they test our controls and make sure that they're operating effectively and that they give us a secure, available and confidential environment. And GDPR, I'm going to presume that everybody has heard of GDPR and that your business is already compliant. And if they're not, maybe have a chat to me after the session and we can have a quiet chat. And of course, I use the pizza, the beer and the party because you have to pay with those with a credit card. All right, Atlassian's compliance history. So as I said, I joined 5 years ago, and at that time, we had one PCI, one payment gateway, which is pretty much no compliance obligations when you run an iframe environment like we did. It was pretty sweet. But we listed, so we had SOX, and that was 2015. And then 2017, we did our first SOC 2, which is a type 1 where the auditors come in and go, are your controls designed effectively? Which is all great, but then you actually need to operate them, and that's where we got a SOC 2 type 2. To be able to support our GDPR environment, we did ISO 27001, 2 and 18, and there is always more compliance obligations coming. And so as an organisation, we are looking at whether we're going to do FedRAMP or HIPAA or other compliance obligations. But that's a bit of our history. So you're not alone in having to deal with compliance obligations. People have work to do. You're delivering service to your customers. You're supporting internal teams. You're making sure your customers are delighted every day. Okay, maybe a step too far. But you get the idea. Risk and compliance is not the thing that your teams are waking up thinking, I need to deliver this every day. So we need to make it easy for them. So, the risk and compliance team at Atlassian, we start with our compliance obligations. So all of those things that we need to do. And then what we do is we set those up and we define them within Jira. We then map those to a set of control objectives. Okay? Now, a lot of organisations, when they build this, they end up with a lot of control objectives. What you've got to try and do is you've got to try and map that down to a smaller set as possible. And then we take those control objectives out to the teams and we say, how do you meet these control objectives? Now, in a lot of organisations, the risk and compliance team will go, okay, I'll put those control objectives on a Confluence page or I'll send it out in an email and I'll get people to respond. Can I just say, does not work. Okay? The teams need to talk. They need to go out there. They need to understand how the teams are actually meeting those control objectives. We capture all of this in Jira. So, that means that every team has a set of control activities that they perform that meet those control objectives. It allows them to focus on the things that they need to do, the activities that they have to perform. Now, they don't have to then think about, okay, I'm doing change management so that I can do ISO 27018. They just go, I need to do change management. But if they want to find out what that supports, They can see that because it's Jira, because it's open. They can look through and see that at any time they want. So, okay. I sort of take it that everybody knows what Jira is, but not many people will be using it for risk and compliance. So the way we think about it is we put in one project all of our compliance stuff. In that project, we have a set of workflows where we design those workflows for things like the control activities, the control objectives, the compliance obligations, but we also map some other things in there. And each one of those, we try to have it as a really simple workflow because we want people to be able to use this tool. Anybody can use the compliance tool. And compliance really benefits from visibility. So the reporting capability of Jira makes it so much better because you can actually see what's in there. It's not hidden in some risk tool that you have to log into, and because you only use it every month, you can't remember how to do that. So, we end up with a control activity library. It's a big list of all of the control activities, but because it's owned by each of the individual team members, it's broken down. Now, trust but verify. Now, does anybody know that that was actually Ronald Reagan who said that? It's pretty horrifying. We want to know that we're going to meet our compliance obligations. So we actually go out and test these to make sure that the teams are doing the control activities that they say they are doing. Now, we record all of the testing results and the findings in Jira because sometimes teams forget to do stuff. And so there are tests that where we go, actually you haven't been doing the thing that you said you were going to be doing. But the good part about it is if the team changes what they're doing because they own the tickets, because they're assigned those tickets, they can actually change them. They can say, I don't do that thing anymore. I do this thing. And then we can deal with that change. One place to capture it all. And we have external auditors. We get to share all of our information that's in our risk tool with our external auditors. So they get to see all of this information. Now you go, okay, that's a little bit scary. Aren't they just going to raise those issues to the board? Well, the board already has all the information. They've got dashboards with all of this information on it. It's already there. So what we find is that our external auditors are able to use the work of our internal audit teams and also for our first line assurance teams in their testing. So they're contacting the teams who are doing real work less often. This is what our compliance obligation ticket looks like. You can see it's a standard, so it's SOX. It's US federal law. And we link that to the control objective. And so in this instance, it's maintain a change management process. We then have a control objective. This is what one of these looks like. You can see in the top box that the components that this relates to, and also the compliance obligations that we map to as well. So it's a two-way street of information. In the middle, you see the description. We try to keep these ones fairly high level, so you don't end up with lots of control objectives. And I think this is where a lot of organisations go wrong in their mapping and the abstraction layer that it provides, is they end up with thousands of control objectives. And what we did try to do was standardise more on simplify the control objectives and then go out to the teams and look at what are the control activities that each of the teams does. And in the bottom box, you see the link to the control activity. And this is what a control activity looks like. And this is where we've gone out to the teams and understand what they do. Top box has all the information about the control activity that's being performed by the team, how often it's done, what type of control it is, all that sort of thing. You can see it's got an assignee on the right-hand side. The control activity is owned by somebody, and that's really important that it's owned. Okay. And then we have a description for what that control activity is. So that if the auditors are looking for, okay, what's the control, what do people do, they can actually go to this and get the information really easily. And of course, as I said, we test. So the top box, it's a test, which component it relates to. We also give some labels to that so that we can report on this and provide metrics to people. In the middle box, we say, what the text is, the design, the test of design. And then in the bottom box, you can see that where we've tested the effectiveness of that control. In the control test, we capture all of the information, all the evidence in relation to this test. Okay? And we also record the result. Now, this is a pass. Of course, I picked a pass. We do have fails. So we do have tests that fail. But the great part about it is that I can instantly see the information on tests that have failed. I can see why they failed. It's all in the ticket. And you can pull that onto a dashboard and you can give real-time click-through information to management. So just think about your CIO being able to see real-time information on pass-fail rates on tests. They get information at their fingertips about control environment. Okay, so now let's talk about using Jira and Confluence to get teams to get context to be able to make decisions, and compliance teams to know what people are doing so that they're not interrupting you all the time. Okay. Agile teams do a sprint, then they learn from it. They can change what they're doing and how they're doing it. Successful Agile teams deliver change fast. We need to be able to help them deliver the right change. Risk and compliance teams want to know what people are doing and when they should be getting involved. So, we use Jira to hold our control activities, which means that if a team wants to change a process, they can see if this is going to impact a control activity. So we're giving that information out to the teams. And by following the links, they can see if there's an impact on a compliance obligation. We use Confluence to hold the policies. If a team's going to change something that would impact a policy, they can see that there as well. And we use Confluence to hold information on the things that the teams can and cannot change. So if they have information to the access all the time, it's not hidden away in some risk tool. People need context. When the teams are making decisions about what they're going to change, they need the information about what the organisation is doing. We talk about open as an organisation. Confluence is the tool that we use to be able to give people that information. If your team's doing stuff and they head off on a tangent because they don't know what the organisation's doing, that's a risk. By giving people the information, you allow them the ability to make the right decision. And compliance wants to know what your team's doing. If you give them access to your backlog, they don't have to keep asking you questions about what you're doing. They can see what you're doing. They can see when it's coming up. The other thing that your teams can do is also put in there whether they believe a particular change or a thing that they're doing is risky or not. So helping your teams do that and be able to make that call helps the compliance team, because then they can filter on what are the things coming up in the next couple of months that could be potentially risky that they need to get more involved in. And they can do that without having to come and interrupt you and ask you questions all the time. All right, to spend less time with your auditors, use Bitbucket and Bamboo to implement peer review and green build controls. And spending time with auditors, we can all do less of that. Okay, in the world of compliance, there are two types of controls. There's specific, and then there's general, or environment controls. Specific controls, if you're thinking about finance, this is often things like debits equals credits, yeah? And this is enforced by the application. But to have that specific control operate for the entire time, you need to have the environment controls wrapped around that. And change management is an environment control. You need both of these things to work for you to have a compliant environment. Okay. For change management, compliance requires two key controls. All changes are approved by someone other than the person making the change, and all changes are tested prior to going to production. So, we all want to get our developers to be able to get their changes to production as fast as possible with as few as barriers. So, we said, instead of following the traditional change management approach, which is define your requirements, build, test, sign off, sign off, sign off, sign off, change approval board, sign off, maybe get to production 6 months later. We wanted, how can we do this faster? How can I get approved and tested code into production fast? And how can I make sure that only approved and tested code goes to production? So, we have all of our code in Bitbucket. We allow any developer in the organisation access to the code. You can fork the code, don't care. You want to take that code back to master, now I care. And so I'm going to look at how we do that. So we set some rules. You can't merge it back to master. You have to create a pull request, and that pull request has to be reviewed by somebody else. Now, peer review is what everybody does to have quality built within their Agile processes. So we just took what everybody already does, and then we system enforced it. Now, so Bitbucket has the ability to do this, and so you can say, I want to have all pull requests, any code going back to master has to be a pull request, and all pull requests must be peer reviewed. You can then define whether there's more than one peer reviewer. If anybody tries to change the code after the review, the approval's backed out. Once the code's been merged to master, we then use Bamboo to run build tests on this and make sure that they're green. Now, our build tests are defined by a combination of our development teams and a QE team to make sure that they're okay. And we store those build tests in Bitbucket, and so they're subject to peer review. If it doesn't get a green build, Bamboo won't build the artifact. This is where you've got to run a cultural check in your organisation. How good's your peer review? Is this something you can rely on? For us, it is. A couple of things that we do with our developers, when we bring them into the organisation, when they join Atlassian, we talk about these are the things that we expect in peer review. This is what we expect you to do when you do code. And we get them to understand that their name's on everything. The Git repos record who made the change, who reviewed the change, when it was done. And everybody gets to see that. It's really open. And people care. They care about the code, but it's also because they're delivering within their small teams They care more because it's their reputation. The other benefit is because they're small teams, they know the code. And so I think about, what's peer review like? What's the risk associated with this? It's actually less because people know what they're doing. If you get a team that reviews the code that doesn't really understand the code, there's not a lot of benefit in doing that. And nobody wants to be the person that reviewed the code that got shipped, that's stuffed up. So they're really cognizant of that. And it's better than a change approval board where the only thing they're looking at to see is who else has signed this off before they sign it off. Now, a lot of organisations in this stage will go, I need to have a checklist of all of the things to make sure that we review as part of our peer review. And can I just say, don't do it. It stops people thinking, and at some point, one of your developers is not going to do the peer review, not going to follow the checklist and fill out the checklist, and then your auditors are going to have a field day because they're going to go, you haven't filled out the checklist. Make it a cultural thing. Make it something that people do. All right. Now, before Bamboo will build the artifact, it checks the repo settings to make sure that they're compliant. Peer review and green build are turned on for the repo settings, on for the repo. If the settings are not correct, Bamboo will not build the artifact. Once the artifact is built, Bamboo then signs the build artifact. So it cryptographically signs that artifact, which is really great because now I can store that artifact anywhere. I don't need to worry about logical access over some S3 bucket, etc. I can just go, it's over there. Production checks to make sure that this artifact is signed before it'll run it. We do control who accesses the production environment, but the only change I'm really worried about in the production environment is that signature check. Because if somebody changes the code in production, well, it won't have a signature on it, so it won't run. So the controls become a lot more easy to enable and to manage and monitor. And the signature check is subject to peer review and green build. And this is what it looks like in Bitbucket. So you can see there, I can take the easy option and just go, I'll choose compliance. And I'll just say which repo I would like that compliance obligation enabled on. And it will go through and it'll put a standard set of compliance obligations on that. Or you can go through and do it yourself. In this case, I'm going through and saying, I want to write access, nobody's got write access, merge by pull request, it has to be everybody. And this is also where I can adjust the number of reviewers. And for some of our teams, they've said, actually, we do particularly risky stuff. And so, there's a big client impact, it's going to be really obvious, and it's subject to SOX. I want to have 2 reviewers. And they'll push that through in their repos. This is what it looks like. This is the end result. So, master, nobody can access it. Everybody has to do merge via pull request, has to be at least 1 reviewer, reset if the branch is modified, and unresolved merge checks are not allowed. Remember when I said it's your auditors, you're going to have to deal with your auditors and explain this? The first time that our auditors came through, they really didn't trust that this really worked. And so what we had to do was we had to show them the list of all of the commits that we've done and that it had a reviewer for every one of those. And it was at that point that they then, oh, actually, this is real. We tried to get them to go around the process. They couldn't. It's then they started to believe it. So, we run about 60 services that are subject to SOX requirements. Each of those is a high change environment, and so that means that we have about 60, traditionally, we would have to do a sample of 60 changes to make sure that they'd been approved every year. 60 sample, 60 services, 3,600 tests. Just think of the impact on the teams where they've got to pull all of that documentation, provide it to the auditors have to pull a sample. It goes on. It's an automated test. One. We went from 3,600 audit tests down to one. Just think of the time that has saved our organisation and the dev teams. It's a massive impact. I had a dev manager come up to me and say, "So when's the audit happening?" I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, I've had a half-hour meeting with the auditors and I've explained the process, but I know that I'm going to get hit with like all of these requests for samples." I said, "It's done." It's like, what? He was expecting that we were going to have all of these hours to provide this information, and it was all done. He'd worked in a SOX environment previously, and he was just blown away by the fact that he didn't have to provide any of this information. Okay. It's great. I get less access management. I don't need to segregate creators and reviewers because the system does that automatically. You can't review your own pull request. Yeah? But I do get some more access management. I need to make sure I know who can turn off the controls. I need to know who can make those changes within the environment, and I need to be able to manage that. Okay. And there is a level of monitoring that you need to do over things like the peer review settings, the green build settings, compliance checks before build, and the signature check in production. And so we do monitor those settings to make sure that if anybody changes them, that I'm notified, and we then follow up with the person's manager to make sure, okay, is there a reason for this? The great part about it though is, if you turn off the settings, Bamboo won't build it. So you've got to turn them back on anyway. So, to recap, compliance, using Jira to abstract away the compliance obligations. Jira and Confluence so the teams get context, and so compliance teams know what you're doing. And the compliant pipeline. Look, I'll be hanging out here this afternoon, and I'm also going to Bash, so if you've got any questions, I love talking about this stuff. You may have already realised that. And hey, it's better than talking to your auditors.
Hollywood movies, Broadway shows, GDPR compliance, you're a man of many talents. Unfortunately, we don't have time for live Q&A, but Guy will be, like you said, at Bash tonight for some questions over a couple of beers. I think he'll be at the back as well to answer any questions, selfies, autographs, whatever the cool kids do these days. But that's it. Thank you very much, everyone.
Cool. Thank you.